He left on a Tuesday morning, the kind of gray that makes every goodbye sound rehearsed. He said he needed time to figure things out, but he packed too neatly for confusion. Our son, Eli, was 3 months old. I watched from the window as he loaded his suitcase into her car. Yes, her car. The woman he left me for. I remember the shape of her sunglasses, the color of her scarf. The way she didn't look guilty enough. The first year alone was a blur of formula, exhaustion, and silence. He sent money sometimes, excuses always. It's complicated, he wrote once. She's not what I expected. I stopped replying. By Eli's 2nd birthday, he'd stopped writing altogether. I built a life without him, worked days, painted nights, and learned to live in the space where love used to echo. People called me strong, but strength is just what's left when everything else is gone. 5 years later, I met her by accident. The woman he left me for. Her name was Madeline. We ran into each other at a small art fair where I was selling my paintings. She didn't recognize me at first, not until she saw Eli standing beside me with his father's eyes. Her face went pale, the kind of white that only truth can drain. He said you moved away, she whispered. I smiled. He says a lot of things. She asked if we could talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Over coffee, she told me everything. How he'd left her too. How he said he wasn't ready for real life. How she'd found my old letters in his drawer, letters he'd mocked when I wrote them. She looked broken in the same way I once was, and for a moment I felt pity. Then she said something that changed everything. I think I finally understand why he couldn't handle you. I tilted my head. Why's that? Because you survived him. We didn't stay friends, but we didn't stay enemies either. 2 women linked by the same wound, stitched together by recognition. Before she left, she said she wanted to meet Eli properly one day. I told her maybe. I wasn't cruel, I just didn't want my son to know the ghost of the man who'd made him. Years later, Eli asked if his father ever loved me. I said, maybe once. But some loves are too small to survive the truth. He nodded like he understood. He probably did. That night, I painted again. Madeline's face in the cafe window, my reflection beside hers. Both blurred by rain. And I realized revenge had already happened. It wasn't loud or cruel. It was time itself, handing me the peace he'd never earn. Because sometimes the most beautiful punishment is this. Becoming the life he'll never be brave enough to return to. He left when our son was barely old enough to say his name. No fights, no tears, just a note on the kitchen counter that said, "You deserve better." And I can't be that man. I stared at those words for hours, wondering if cowardice always sounded so poetic on paper. For years, I raised our son alone. Every milestone, first steps, first fever, first word, happened in the quiet absence of his applause. And every night, when the house went still, I told myself I was enough. Even when I wasn't sure I believed it. He sent money sometimes, just enough to prove he remembered we existed. The checks came with short notes, "Hope you're doing okay." He never asked what okay meant anymore. By the time Eli turned 6, I'd stopped hoping for any version of him to come back. Then one afternoon, I saw her. The woman he'd left me for. She was sitting alone at a park bench, staring at the playground where my son was climbing the slide. I recognized her immediately. She looked smaller than I remembered, not in size but in spirit. I almost turned away, but curiosity has a cruel voice. I sat beside her. She glanced over, startled, and for a moment I saw panic bloom in her eyes. She started. Yes, I said. I am. Silence settled like dust between us. She spoke first. He's gone, she said flatly. Left a few months ago. No goodbye this time. I waited for the satisfaction to come, but it didn't. Only pity. He told me you made him feel trapped, she added. Now I think he just doesn't know how to stay anywhere. We talked for nearly an hour, two women dissecting the same ghost. She asked about Eli, said she always wanted children but he'd convinced her it wasn't the right time. I didn't tell her it never would have been. Instead, I said, he's a good kid. He doesn't ask for much. She nodded, looking at my son with a kind of reverence. As if he were proof of something she'd never get back. Before leaving, she reached into her bag and handed me a photograph, him smiling at a dinner table, hand on her shoulder. I don't want it anymore, she said. I took it, not out of forgiveness, but because it felt like closing a door. That night, after Eli fell asleep, I burned the photo in the sink. The ashes curled like old promises. I didn't feel vengeful or righteous, just clean. Because revenge isn't always about destroying what hurt you. Sometimes it's about living long enough to watch what broke you crumble on its own. And when I tucked my son into bed, I realized I'd already won, not because he left, but because I stayed. He left when our son was 2, and he didn't even have the courage to do it in person. Just a text at 6:43 a.m. that said, I need to find myself. I remember standing by the crib, reading those words while Eli slept, thinking, you already found yourself, you just didn't like what you saw. He left me the mortgage, the diapers, and the silence. I kept everything else running, because mothers don't get to pause. For years, he was a ghost that haunted receipts and birthday cards. He sent money inconsistently, excuses constantly. I stopped showing Eli the pictures he sent. I wanted my son to remember laughter, not absences. Then, one summer afternoon, I saw her. The woman he'd left me for. She was volunteering at the community center where I taught art classes. I almost didn't recognize her, her hair shorter, eyes tired, the shine gone. She introduced herself like we were strangers. You're Eli's mom, right? She said. Her voice trembled, and that's when I realized she knew exactly who I was. I said, yes. And you're the reason he doesn't have a father. I expected anger, maybe defense. But she just nodded. You're right, she whispered. And I'm sorry. He left me too. We sat in the empty hallway afterward, two women with the same wound stitched differently. She told me he'd promised her a future, then disappeared after their second miscarriage. He said it was too much sadness for him, she said, staring at her hands. Like grief was my fault. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to hate her. But instead I saw my reflection, another woman who believed a man's confusion was her responsibility. You know, I told her quietly, you and I both raised his ghosts. She looked up, tears she refused to hide, and said, at least yours became someone real. That line stayed with me. Years later, Eli asked if I was ever angry. I told him no, not anymore. Anger needs an audience. And his father had already disappeared into a silence I didn't intend to fill. But sometimes, when I pass the community center, I think of her. The woman who thought she won, only to end up holding the same emptiness. And I realize that revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's watching the story finish itself without you, seeing the man who thought he was escaping responsibility vanish into nothing, while you raise everything he abandoned into something beautiful. Because the best kind of revenge is legacy, and mine calls me mom. He left before Eli's first birthday, promising to stay involved. The way men promise things they already plan to forget. I didn't chase him. I just watched his taillights dissolve into the night and thought, at least the lies are gone. 2. For years, I raised our son alone. Every scraped knee, every fever, every late bill, mine. He sent gifts on Christmas, texted once in June, and then silence. By the time Eli turned 6, I'd stopped explaining who his father was. I told him love can still make mistakes. And that sometimes people leave not because they stop loving you, but because they never knew how to love anyone properly. Then one afternoon at the grocery store, I saw her. The woman he left me for. Her name, once whispered like a wound, came back sharp, Marissa. She looked different now. Paler, thinner, holding a basket full of baby food and regret. I almost turned away, but she saw me first. She started, but her voice broke. I nodded. Yes, I'm the one he left. We stood in the cereal aisle, surrounded by all the quiet consequences of bad choices. She looked down at the child tugging at her sleeve, his child. Not mine, and I realized she was living the same life I had, just a few years behind. He's gone again, she said finally. I thought he'd change with me. I wanted to be cruel, to say they never do. But instead I said, they only change when they lose what they thought would wait forever. She cried then, soft, embarrassed tears. I helped her pick up the bottle her son had dropped. The gesture so absurdly domestic that it made us both laugh. 2 women, strangers, cleaning up the mess of one man. Before she left, she asked quietly, "Does it get easier?" I said, "No, but it gets quieter." That night, I tucked Eli into bed and thought about her, about the cycle we both broke simply by surviving him. Maybe that was the truest revenge of all. Not bitterness, not triumph, but endurance. Because while he kept running from responsibility, we were the ones building lives in the wreckage he left behind. And years later, when Eli asked why his father never came back, I told him the truth. Some men, I said, spend their whole lives searching for peace, never realizing they already abandoned it. Then I kissed his forehead and turned off the light, knowing that every dream I'd built, every bit of calm I'd earned, was the ending he would never get to live. He left in the middle of the night. The way cowards do, with the lights still on and the baby monitor blinking quietly. Eli was barely a year old. He didn't even take his toothbrush. Just his jacket, his phone, and the part of me that still believed in family. I didn't chase him. I just picked up our son and said the words he should have, "We'll be okay." The years that followed were a study in resilience. I worked 2 jobs, learned how to fix a faucet, paid bills with coins, and memorized every way a child can ask for love without saying it. He sent money sometimes, but never enough to fill the silence. I told Eli his father was away for work, even when the lie tasted like rust. Then, one afternoon at the library, I saw her. The woman he left me for. She was reading to a small girl, her voice trembling on every page. When she looked up, I recognized the same exhaustion in her that had once lived in me. She knew who I was before I said a word. "He's gone," she said quietly, as if confessing a crime. "Left us last winter." I didn't gloat. I didn't forgive. I just sat beside her, listening. She told me about the nights he disappeared, the excuses recycled from my past, the promises still warm from overuse. Her daughter climbed into her lap, and for a moment I saw what he'd done, not just to me, but to her, to the child, to the version of himself that never learned how to stay. Before she left, she said, "I used to hate you. Now I think you were the only one who ever understood him. I smiled faintly. Understanding him was the mistake. That night, I tucked Eli into bed and told him a story about strength, not the kind that roars, but the kind that wakes up every day and chooses to continue. He asked if his dad would ever come home. I said, no, but we did. Years later, when my art was displayed in a gallery downtown, she came. The woman he left me for. She brought her daughter. We didn't talk about him. We just stood together, two women who survived the same hurricane. And as she looked at a painting of a mother holding her child against a storm, she whispered, "You found peace." I nodded. No, I said, I built it. Because revenge isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's reconstruction, the quiet power of creating a world so full, so steady, that the man who once left it behind could never belong in it again.